this video, I'll be going over how to adapt an example of a more complex toy. So the way I structured this presentation is first I'm going to go over the list of materials you're going to be needing to adapt the toy. That I'll include in the description below. And then after that, I'm going to move into adapting the toy from start to finish in a step-by-step demonstration. So let's get started with the list of materials. So first you're going to need a ruler, a simple screwdriver to open up your toy. Batteries, the number and the type depend on the toy you're adapting. Make sure it's a battery operated toy. You're gonna need a 6-foot, 3.5mm stereo extension cable, a pair of wire cutters, a pair of wire strippers, the helping hands toolkit, or you could use 2 alligator clips like these. You're also gonna need a drill, soldering equipment, so solder, a spool of solder, and soldering iron. You'll also need a digital multimeter. And finally, of course, you're going to need your battery-operated hard plastic toy, which likely has a circuit board, but it doesn't have to have a circuit board. And so now that we went over the materials, I'm going to show you the toy that we're going to be working with. So I'll just put these to the side. Okay, so the toy we're going to be adapting in this video is going to be zoom tube car tracks. So it's essentially a remote controlled car that zooms around in a bunch of plastic tubes found within the box. And so I've already opened it. And essentially what we're going to be doing is we're going to be adapting the remote. So if you are adapting a toy like a remote controlled car, you are likely going to be adapting the remote. However, it doesn't have to be a toy like this as long as it's a battery operated toy. Usually a hard plastic toy with a circuit board. As long as it has that and it has a button, most importantly, it has a button that you would press to activate the toy. Those are pretty much the prerequisites you're going to need for adapting the certain type of toy. And so this is the toy we're going to be using, so I'm going to put it to the side. And I'm going to take it out here. And also for this presentation, for the sake of demonstration, I've had 2 extras of these toys, so I'm just going to show you briefly of sort of like the process of adaptation. And of course it's going to be different for each toy, but essentially what you're going to be doing is, in short, you're going to be preparing this cable and preparing the female end, as this is what a switch is going to plug into to activate the toy. And then once you get that prepared, you're essentially going to find the circuit board, or if there's no circuit board, usually points of solder, which are essentially these silver points that you can see that are on the circuit board. And you essentially have to find 2 points of connection that activate the toy. And that's where the multimeter actually comes into play, as we'll get to. And once you find these 2 points of connection, you just simply solder the ends at the female wire to these points, and then close up the toy, and that's pretty much it. So it's a fairly simple adaptation process, as you can see here. The only difference between these two toy schematics is that one is just a circuit board, and the other is the circuit board, but it has the female cable attached to 2 significant solder points, which are the points of connection to turn on the toy. So that's essentially what you can look forward to on this presentation. Let's put these to the side for now. And we're going to be starting with opening up the toy, of course. Again, for this toy specifically, we're just going to be working with the remote, so I can put the car and the charger to the side. And now at this point, I'm going to use my screwdriver to open up the toy. And if you're following along, essentially what you want to do is just open up the toy until you can reach the circuit board, because sometimes when you're opening up battery operated toys, there'll be a lot of interior screws you don't necessarily have to access. And especially you're going to look near the point where you're going to be looking near the point where you would actually click the toy, essentially where the button is, you would press to turn the toy on, as that's likely going to be the place that we're going to find the points of connection that I was referencing a little bit earlier. And so essentially just open up your toy until you find the circuit board. In this case, the circuit board's right there, so I already know how to get there. But if your toy is a little bit bigger or has a little bit more open areas, you may need to take out all the screws completely to gain access to the circuit board, or really wherever the button is, because that's where we're going to be adapting. So almost done here. All right, there we go. All right, so now that we've got the toy open, we're going to be looking at the circuit board. So in this case, the circuit board that we need to access is on this side. So there are 2 more screws we're going to have to take out. And also make sure to keep track of your screws, as your toy may use different types of screws. So you want to, at the end, make sure you are putting the right screws in the right places. All right, so now that I got that done, I'm gonna take out the circuit board and take a look. And so, as we saw a little bit earlier when I brought in the examples, essentially what you're gonna do, if you're following along, find a circuit board like this, and we're gonna move on. And if there's no circuit board, just find points of solder like these. Because if you don't have a circuit board, it's likely going to be an easier toy to adapt, and it's essentially just going to be a bunch of wiring with solder points. So just find the wiring with solder points, or more importantly, find the circuit board if the toy has one. So now that we got that set up, we're actually going to put it to the side for now, and we're going to bring in the multimeter. And so if you haven't set up the multimeter, I'll just quickly go over how to set it up. So usually the multimeter will come without these attached, of course. And in the back here, in the battery compartment, what you're going to want to do is open it up, and it's going to be a 9-volt battery that you're going to have to put in the battery compartment. So the multimeter should come like this. After you open up, you'll find this here, and essentially you just pair this up with the 9-volt battery. You fit the correct notches here into the top of the 9-volt battery. Just get it in and make sure it's tightly fastened. And then you're just simply going to put it back in and just close up the digital multimeter. And now that that part's done, we're actually going to turn the multimeter on. Before we turn on, actually, we have to put in the wires that the multimeter that it came with. So essentially what you're going to want to do is unravel the wires. And you're going to put the black one into the bottom right hand hole here, and then the red one to the bottom left hand. And these are called the probes, and these ends are actually what we're going to be using to test the different solder points. So of course you want to turn the multimeter on, just put it to the first setting on the right, so 500, doesn't really matter. Just use that setting for now, as that's what's going to be the most helpful. And at this point, I'm going to put batteries in the toy and turn it on. So I have 2 AA batteries, because this toy required 2 AA batteries. Simply put them in, and the on switch was here, so I'll just flick that on. And at this point, we're going to test to see if the toy works. So there are actually 2 switches for this toy. So there's a front switch and a back switch, so for the toy to go forward and the toy to go backwards. In this case, I'm only going to be adapting the front switch, but if your toy only has 1 switch you usually click, that's going to be the one you're going to be looking at. So activate the toy through the original switch. In this case, this is the button switch here. And I'm just touching that, and as you can see, this LED is lighting up, so that's how I know it's functioning. Although I could turn the car on and see the car zoom, but I don't necessarily need to do that. So you just find the switch you're going to be working with, and just make sure it activates in the correct way. And now we're actually going to be using the helping hands tool kit to hold the circuit board in place. You may not need to do this, especially if your circuit board's already in an exposed area like this. But however, my circuit board was upside down like this, and I have to work on this side of the circuit board. So if your circuit board is already like this, completely exposed, and you have a good area to work in, you could just leave it like this. But you can also use the Helping Hands toolkit to sort of fasten it in. So that's what I'm gonna do here. And now at this point, I'm gonna bring the camera a little bit closer. So I'll switch the camera angle here, just so we can see a little bit better of what's going on. All right, so now we're a little bit up close. So now we can actually see a little bit better of what the circuit board looks like and what I was mentioning before of how you want to get to this area of the circuit board. You may be presented with something that looks like this. However, we're gonna work with the components that usually have the solder bits. So these silver areas are actually the solder bits. And if you don't have a circuit board, you're also gonna look for these areas of soldering, as that's what you're gonna be making the connection to. So this is sort of what you wanna try to find. And so I found it here, and I'm a little bit closer so I could show you the next step. So the next thing we're actually gonna do is we're gonna use the multimeter. Again, make sure it's in the on setting on 500, the first one to the right. And so what we're essentially doing here now is we wanna find the 2 points of connection that allow for the toy to be turned on. So remember how I turned the toy on previously, where I clicked the button in the back, and you can actually see that LED light up. So with the multimeter setting and with the toy on, with the batteries in, what we're gonna be doing is, once we find the 2 points of connection, there are actually gonna be 2 points of connection within the toy that we have to find with these two ends of the multimeter. And so when we touch the 2 points of connection, if it's a positive connection, then the toy will turn on. And if nothing is there, then the toy won't turn on. So let's try by these 2 points right here, for example. Here we go. So we touch here, these two, and we don't see the LED light up immediately. And so that's totally fine. It may take a little while to find out what exactly the 2 points are that we're gonna be adapting. And also just a general note, these components over here, these more complex ones, usually with letters, we're not gonna be touching necessarily. And for this example, actually, because there was sort of this button switch, as you can see, these 4 prongs at the end, they directly go through the circuit board. And so we're gonna be testing around there, but if your toy doesn't have that, it's fine. Just test around an area that is generally open. Again, you're not gonna be wanting to test around these components, as therefore a different process. But again, as we go here, test these two, no response. Okay, that's fine. Test these two, and you actually get a response, as you can see there with the LED lit up. And another thing about this is, depending on the toy, the different points of connection may actually have different functions. So for example, there could be a toy that has a rotating function and also like a music function. And so if you find one point of connection, it may actually only do the rotation. But if you find another point of connection, it may only do the music. And so generally you can find a point of connection that has both of the functions included. But if you can't, and you just want one, for example, just the rotating or just the music, you would mark down those 2 points of connection that allowed that when touched would actually activate that special function. So in this case, whichever points of function I find is going to be the same function, which is just the car moving forward. So we could adapt there. We couldn't adapt there because nothing comes up. We could actually adapt here as well because the red light comes up. If we move the thing over here, no light, we get a light there, get a light there. So again, it's just testing around until you find the point where when the 2 nodes are touching 2 points of solder connection, that the toy would turn on. So for the sake of example, I'll just do these 2 right here. So this one and this one. And also it doesn't matter if you put the black one down first or the red one down first. Generally, if you're identifying 2 points of connection, the toy will just turn on regardless of which one you use first. So again, I'm testing again, making sure that that is the correct one. And so in this case, we're just gonna be marking that one down for reference. All right, so now that we found the 2 points of connection, we're actually gonna put the Helping Hands tool here aside for a second, and I'm actually going to be using the drill. But so In this case, for my toy, what you can actually do is, as you can see here, the toy usually closes up with these two parts here. And so what I'm going to be doing is I'm actually going to be drilling the hole in between this. And so you don't have to do it this way, of course. If you just have a solid piece of plastic like this, you just drill it completely through. But the most important thing I could tell you at this point is you want to drill a hole near where the 2 points of connection are. So the 2 points of connection are actually these two right here. And so I'm drilling right nearby it. So essentially the wires that connect it are just going to go right underneath this, and it's just going to come out of the hole. So you don't have to close your toy back up, especially if it's a bigger toy like a ball machine. You won't necessarily have to do that. So, but for this case, I'm just going to close my toy back up and drill the hole. You want to use a drill bit that has about the same diameter as this wire here, which is the stereo extension cable. And you want to have the drill bit be about the same diameter, but you can have it be a little bit less. Because essentially what you're going to be doing is you're going to be inserting this cable into the toy. And so if you have a drill bit too big, then obviously the cable is going to move around a lot. So have a little bit smaller or about this size. Again, you could just, just eye it based off the diameter of both pieces. Now that I have that done, I have the drill done here. And so the next thing I'm going to do is actually put this aside, and we're going to be working with the stereo extension cable here. So what we're going to be doing is just unraveling the stereo extension cable, and we're actually going to be working with the female end. As you can see here, this is actually what the switch plugs into. And so at this point you have to cut the wire, and so it also depends on the type of toy you're using. If you're using a little bit of a bigger toy like a ball machine, you may want to have a little bit more wire coming out of the toy, especially because a lot of the wire is going to have to go through the toy. But for my example, I'm going to cut about 4 inches from here. So I'm just going to go along here and cut 4 inches. However, you can use a little bit more, especially if your toy is bigger. Again, based on my toy, I really drilled right next to the point of connection, so that's why I'm using about 4 inches. So if you're a little bit further, use maybe 6 inches, maybe 8 inches. It's always better to start off, it's always better to use a little bit more. So I would say use 8 inches if you aren't sure, because then you can always have the wire just going throughout the toy, and it's better to have more wire than less wire. So I have about 4 inches here, and I'm just going to use the wire cutter to cut it. So just cut completely through with the wire cutter. You can also use scissors. And we're going to put the side with the male end here to the side, as we're not going to be using it. And so now that we got that ready, we're going to move on to the next step. The next step is actually going to be take out the wire strippers and the wire stripper, and to essentially strip off the black end of this cable. As you can see, there are actually different cables in here, and this is actually what we want to access. So you can either use a wire stripper to get the black off, or you can use just a wire cutter again. And essentially what you're going to do is just lightly cut the edge. As you can see, it's a little bit hollow in there. And so if you lightly cut the edge, you won't necessarily cut through any of the wires. And so that's what I'm going to be doing. And you want to strip about 1 inch from the end. So this is the end here. It's about 1 inch. I'm going to go right here. And you can either use a wire stripper. You can even use your fingernail. But just lightly cutting into the edge here. And as you can see right there, open it up a little bit, you can actually see the interior wires. So I'm going to use my fingernail here just to open it up. And so there we go. And at this point, you should see 3 wires. You'll see likely a red, yellow, and the other one may have a different color than here. In this case, it's white. You may have a black wire or even a different colored wire. But essentially what we're going to do is we're going to keep the red and yellow wires. And we're going to cut the white wire completely off. So just go to the base of where the wires are. And I'm just going to use the wire cutter here. Just cut completely through. And we can put all this to the side. It's not going to be used anymore. And now at this point, we actually want to strip a little bit off these wires, because what actually conducts the current for this main wire is these little tiny copper wires within. And so it may actually be a little bit difficult to see, But what we're gonna have to do is, just like we stripped off the black cable to reveal these cables, now we're gonna strip these cables to reveal the inner copper. And so you wanna strip about a 1/4 inch, so about right there. And I'm gonna use my fingernail, although you could use the wire cutters or the wire strippers as well. I wouldn't use the wire cutters because this is a very thin cable. And so you don't necessarily wanna be cutting through the wire. But as you can see there, it's just a lightly putting pressure down and just pulling. And as you can see, we have the copper wires within. So I'm just gonna twist these for a second. And now that we did it on the red, we're gonna do it on the yellow. Doesn't matter which order you go in, but you just wanna have about the same thing for both wires. So again, 1/4 inch. Use my fingernail, just apply pressure and pull. There we go. Here's the copper wire. And now, at this point, we're actually gonna be soldering to the ends of the wires. So, to plug in my soldering iron. And at this point also, I'll just briefly talk about what you do in the soldering process. So I'll put this to the side and I'll bring in my soldering equipment. But essentially, the basics, what you have is the solder, which is actually just a spool of metal, a very thin conductive metal. And you have the soldering iron, which is over here. And essentially what happens is when you turn the soldering iron on, like I just did, the soldering iron will heat up to a very high temperature. And when you press the solder, so again, the wire into the soldering iron, again, sort of, you hold it like a pen. As you press it into that, this metal wire will actually melt because it'll reach the melting point as it touches the soldering iron, and it'll actually solidify on the point of connection. So I'm just gonna let it heat up for a little bit, and I'll try to show you a quick demo here. Oh, there we go. As you can see, when I touch it to it, a little small glob forms, and that's exactly what we're gonna want. So I'm gonna put the soldering iron to the side now, and I'm actually gonna bring in my cable that we've just been preparing. And so I'm gonna hold the cable in place with the helping hands. It's gonna be very helpful because we don't necessarily wanna hold the cable as when we're soldering, we have to use both hands. And so what I'm gonna do at this point is just twist the wires together because you don't wanna have a lot of frays of wires as you're gonna be soldering to the ends. And so now we get to this point, we're gonna be soldering to the ends of the wires. And so you can either start yellow wire or red wire at the same time. In this case, I'll just start on the yellow wire. Just lightly touching to it, and then right on top of the wire here. And you wanna try to form a little glob at the end, as that's gonna be important later on. There we go. So that should be enough. And I'll do the same thing for the other side. Okay, there we go. So there's a little small glob of solder. And now at this point, we're actually pretty much done with preparing the cable. And so we can actually bring the toy back in. And at this point, you would actually insert the wire into the toy through the hole. However, for this example, I actually drilled between the two edges, so I can actually open up the toy and then close the toy right on the end of the wire. So that's what I'm going to be doing. But if you drill completely through, at this point, you just insert the wire through the hole with the soldered ends first, as far as you can. So I'm going to open up the toy. Okay, there we go. And so now I'm gonna gain access to this again. And again, so what you're gonna be trying to be doing is you wanna solder these two ends to the points of connection we identified, which are actually these 2 points right here. And then you're gonna wanna have, you're gonna wanna lead these ends out of the toy very easily. So I have the 2 ends here. And I know the circuit board has to face down again, so I want to kind of attach them here and then have it loop out like this around. So, but if your circuit board is up, of course, you don't necessarily have to do that. But I'm gonna have to take an extra step here because the circuit board's upside down. So at this point, we're actually going to be soldering again. So get your soldering iron ready. And we're going to be soldering. But before we actually solder, the very important thing you can do, you're going to actually make a knot within this wire. So just make a simple knot through. And also, if you aren't working with this type of toy I'm doing now, you had to insert the wire through, and you would actually make a knot on the interior. So you'd be on the interior here, you would make the knot. So let's say this was closed up. So you'd have it on the interior, and then you would make the knot. So that way, if you pulled the female end here, the knot would actually get stuck, because you don't want to solder and then have this wire be pulled and then the solder connections become loose and it actually breaks off and the toy won't work anymore. So you're just sort of making this knot as a preventative method. You could also use a big zip tie to sort of line up against the thing if you don't want to make a knot, or if you don't have enough wire to necessarily make a knot. So that's another option for you. And so now what we're going to do is we're going to solder to the ends here. So it doesn't matter if I go yellow on top or red on top. I'll just have it in the way I sort of have it now. And so also what we did, since we made the globs on the ends of the wires, essentially all we're going to be doing is just melting these ends right onto the ends that we identified as the points of connection. So that's what I'm going to be doing. Start with the top one, and essentially just heat up the end right onto the point of connection. Hold it down for a couple seconds before you let go. And before you move on to the other side, try to pull it. Make sure it doesn't become loose. It's a good sign. And now you do the same thing for the other side. Okay, there we go. And also, very importantly, you don't want these two ends to touch, because if they touch, the toy won't necessarily work the way you want it to. So just like that, if the points are a little further, you'll be fine. But if the points are close, you want to just make sure they aren't connecting at any time. All right, so now that we finished that, what we can actually do now is we can actually test the toy to see if it works. And so first test with the interior switch, make sure you didn't mess up any of the circuitry. So if I touch this, the LED should turn on, and it does, good. And now at this point, if we identified the correct points of connection and we plug it in and the batteries are in, then the toy should work with the switch. So exactly what I'm going to be doing now. I have a 3D printed switch here, and I'm going to plug it into the female end. And if the toy works, when I hit the switch, then the LED should turn on, or the toy you're going to be using, the toy should activate or turn on or do whatever function you want it to do. So I'm going to be touching the switch. And good, it turns on. That's how we know we made the right connection. If the toy doesn't turn on, go back to the 2 points of connection. Test it again with the multimeter with the two ends. Make sure you found the right points. You might have just soldered to the right points, to the wrong points. So just redo that, solder again, and make sure you have on the right points. And then test again until you make sure you have the toy activating with the switch. And so now we actually adapted the toy. And so at this point, if the knot is completely through, you would just simply close it up. In my case, I'm gonna have to do a little bit more, because this toy had the circuit board down. So I'm just gonna have to close it up this way. That's fine. All right. And yeah, just close up the toy completely, all the way. And after you close the toy up, you're actually going to be testing to see if the toy works again with the switch. And if it does, you're pretty much going to be done. And if it doesn't, you would have to open up the toy again and see what went wrong. If you didn't use enough wire, maybe, then the wire may have broken off from the point of connection. So you just have to test and see what would happen. But likely, if you followed the instructions presented here, the toy should be working still. The knot would likely be in there. In this case, it's not though. So I have to take a little bit longer, but that's okay. All right, so closed it off camera, but as you can see, when you're working on the edges of two different parts of plastic and it's near the end here, you can just close it right on top of it and make sure the knot is on the inside. So if I pull this, I'm pulling very hard, it's pulling on the knot and not on these 2 points of connection, as you can see right there. So I'm just gonna keep closing up the toy. And now we have the final product. So again, just to see if it works. In this case, I'll just bring in the card just to show you how the toy would usually work. So turn the toy on, flash like that. Click the end here. So it's just testing to see if the toy originally works. And now we're actually gonna be testing with the switch again. And if nothing went wrong along the way, then it should work with the switch. So I'm actually gonna be touching here. And as you can hear, when I touch it down, the toy, the wheel actually moves. So that's how we know we did it right. And that is the conclusion of this presentation. Thank you for watching. Again, all the materials and other helpful resources will be in the description below.